I sincerely hope that mine is just one of many portraits of prime ministers from both parties that will continue to be hung here for decades and centuries to come. But that will require that in these perilous times, both parties, whatever their other differences, come together against external forces that threaten our independence and against domestic policies that threaten our unity. We must preserve Canada, this country handed down to us by Providence, preserved by our ancestors, and held in trust for our descendants. We must make any sacrifice necessary to preserve the independence and the unity of this blessed land.
Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, they're urging political parties to work together for the sake of national unity. Harper's in Ottawa this week for celebrations marking 20 years since he and the Conservatives formed government. Yesterday, his official portrait was unveiled, and tonight there is a gala dinner honoring his time spent in office. Former colleagues of his, from cabinet ministers to MPs to senior staff, and even politicians of different stripes, including former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien, are in the nation's capital for the events. Among those who are here is Burney. He served as a political strategist to Harper on foreign policy and trade and played a key role in the transfer of power from Prime Minister Paul Martin's Liberals to Harper's Conservatives. Burney was also Chief of Staff to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and served as former Canadian ambassador to the United States from 1989 to 1993. Hi, Mr. Burney. It is such a joy to see you here in studio. Thanks for making the time.
I'm happy to be here in my Ottawa uniform.
Yes, very much so. I wanted to start off just on your reflections as you go through these days of meeting people that you were working with for decades ago. What the experience has been like? What's the walk down memory lane like?
Well, it's been terrific because I haven't seen these people, many of them, in almost 20 years. But it was good to see so many of them still here, number one. And everybody has, great memories of what it was like serving that government. I was fortunate to be in at the very beginning. The first 2 weeks between the election and the swearing in of the government is a pretty frantic time, trying to put a team together, put a cabinet together. What the transition team did, Vashi, was we had a day-by-day plan for the Prime Minister in order to get the job done within 12 days. Keep in mind, the Americans take 3 months to do a transition. We do ours in 2 weeks. So you're under a lot of pressure to deliver. But so we had to interview candidates for the cabinet, and then we had to get them vetted, by the RCMP and other tax folks. And then we proposed a structure to restructure the cabinet committees because they'd become very bloated under Paul Martin. And so we slimmed them down. We slimmed the cabinet down remarkably. Of course, it grew back up like a Topsy. I mean,
Weren't you a big proponent, if I remember reading right, of slimming the size of the cabinet specifically?
Absolutely. It should never be above 20. If the Americans can get by with 10, why do we need 45? I mean, it doesn't make sense. But it's jobs for the boys and girls. But no, we started off slim because nobody had previous cabinet experience. Nobody. We had two that had provincial government experience, John Baird and Jim Flaherty, and that was a big asset because any kind of government qualifies. But the rest, we were picking people that nobody really knew.
What about Stephen Harper himself, right? This is the election, the first election that he won. He had obviously not been Prime Minister before. Take us behind the curtain a little bit about what that was like.
Well, he was demanding, as you might expect. I didn't expect him to go through the mandate letters for each minister word for word, but he did. And I had to listen to all the comments he had to make, and then we had to make revisions to satisfy him. But the interesting part was he, in the middle of the 2004 campaign, I got a call from his then Chief of Staff, Tom Flanagan. He said, look, we might just win this thing. They weren't planning to win. And they weren't ready. They didn't have a transition team. So he said, I've got Huey Siegel and myself and you. Can we put something together in the next 3 weeks? Because it was only 3 weeks away from the election. So that's how I first actually got to meet Mr. Harper, because we presented a briefing to him at that time. And then after that election, he almost immediately said, look, we got to be ready for the next one, so let's do it in a more structured manner. And so that's how we put the team together and went from there.
I'll fast forward 20 years to last night, and you were there in the room as the portrait was unveiled, and you listened to the comments from both Prime Minister Carney and former Prime Minister Harper. We started this segment off with that very poignant moment at the end of Prime Minister Harper's speech where he appealed to everyone's sense of unity while we face an external threat. What did you think of that?
I thought it was one of the most positive opportunities for all Canadians that I've seen in my entire government career. It was excellent. Both prime ministers spoke eloquently, positively about Canada and what Canada needed to do to keep together, keep united, to deal with the external challenges. It was a pretty good euphemism for you-know-who, and all the internal pressures. No, I thought it was a magnificent event. I would hope that many Canadians will get to see it. I hope that Canadian students will watch it carefully, because it was the most powerful pro-Canada message that you could hear, and it was great. The audience loved it.
Yeah, particularly from two prime ministers of different parties.
Well, they were saying the same. They were singing in the same, whatever. They were singing the same song.
Yeah.
You know, talking about national unity, talking about external pressures, talking about the challenges of being a prime minister of Canada. This is a very difficult country to govern. Yeah. It's big and very diverse. I know that from my own experience with Mr. Mulroney. So, yeah, no, it was a magnificent expression of Canadian positive views. That's why I think it was a great tonic for the country.
I hate to inject any sense of realism beyond that, but we are facing an extreme challenge south of the border, and particularly this year with the review of CUSMA. We know some of the sort of processes are in place, but we also have, in combination with that, very incendiary rhetoric coming from the White House on a number of fronts, but even as it pertains to CUSMA. If the government were to ask you, like, what's your advice? What do we do this year? What would you tell them?
My first point would be no deal is better than a bad deal. So in other words, we don't have to show any eagerness to conclude a new deal. We only can conclude a deal that's going to be good for Canada. So we have to be very firm on that point. We have to make sure that the American businessmen who rely on Canada's exports in order to survive start speaking up. They've been very quiet so far. I mean, the auto executives are the classic example. They've been almost mute. I would love to see some of the Asian, European partners decide to invest in the Canadian auto sector. I think that would be the best tonic for CUSMA that you could get. I similarly would like to see some defense expenditures made to either Europeans or Asian allies, just to serve notice that we're not exclusively reliant on the United States for defense, because we shouldn't be. I mean, why would we trust them on a thing as sensitive as defense in terms of procurement, when at any moment they could shut off the technology, for all you know, the way they're behaving these days. So I think, most of all, keep our cool. Don't be stampeded into a bad agreement. We're going to see a decision, hopefully, from the Supreme Court on the tariffs. And if they don't throw them out, they're certainly going to raise questions about them, because they're totally illegal. I mean, why would you negotiate a new agreement with a country that's already broken the one we've got? I mean, we can't get around that. We should have learned the lesson. They can't be trusted. This administration cannot be trusted.
What is the implication of that for the approach that we take going into this? Like, should we be taking a harder line?
It's not a question of taking a harder line. We know what we want. We know what they want from us. We have to make decisions about whether we're prepared to make concessions on the things that they're pressing on, whether it's supply management or dairy access. We have to make balanced decisions about that. We have to be able to demonstrate to the Canadian public that we got something in return, not just a renewal on their terms, but a renewal on that is a mutual advantage. If it isn't mutually advantageous, it's not worth it.
We're going to leave it on that note. Mr. Burney, a pleasure as always. Thanks for your insights.
Good to see you.